6 months after my son's wedding, I received a quiet call that stopped my breath. The photographer said he'd found something and begged me not to warn my son. I went alone. What I saw proved the woman my son married was never who she claimed to be. I didn't confront her. I stayed silent. And by the time she realized what I knew, it was already too late. That single moment set everything in motion, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me ask one small thing. Subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Knowing someone's walking beside me makes carrying this story easier. My name is Walter Hughes. I'm 70 years old, retired. I spent most of my life teaching young people how to build things with their hands. Wood, metal, patience. I live alone now in Red Hollow, Arizona, a town small enough that people wave without checking who you are first. After my wife, Eleanor, passed away 10 years ago, this house and I learned how to coexist without filling every silence. Mornings start early whether you want them to or not. Knees complain before coffee's ready. Evenings are slower, spent on the porch watching the sky sink behind mesquite trees. Eleanor used to say sunsets with a day apologizing for leaving. I still believe her. My son, Daniel, has always been the one constant. Mechanical engineer. Smart, steady, kind in a way you don't teach. He moved to Mesa for work, but never missed his Sunday calls. Promises mattered to him because they mattered to his mother. So when Daniel told me he'd met someone special, I felt something loosen in my chest. Her name was Claire Morgan. Confident, polished, sharp smile. She spoke about investments and growth the way I spoke about grain patterns and clean cuts. Different worlds, same intensity. Most important, she looked at my son like the world made sense when he stood beside her. For a widower who spent years praying his boy wouldn't settle for loneliness disguised as independence, that was enough. Their wedding was beautiful, in that magazine-perfect way. A desert garden outside Tempe. String lights glowing like soft stars. Linen suits. Champagne flowing freely. I wore the gray suit Eleanor picked for our 40th anniversary. It still fit, or maybe memory helped along. When Claire walked down the aisle, Daniel's hands trembled. Not fear. Hope. I recognized it instantly. I once held that same feeling and tried not to drop it. That night, alone in my hotel room, I loosened my tie, sat on the edge of bed, and whispered into the quiet, "You're safe now, son." For months afterward, life settled again. Photos arrived by text, weekend trips, wine tastings, dinners where candlelight softened everything. Daniel looked happy. And seeing your child happy feels like you've finally done something right. I even began planning a gift for their first anniversary. A cedar jewelry box. Hand-cut dovetails. Something that would last longer than trends. I thought peace had arrived. I didn't know peace was borrowed. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning. No drama. Just a phone vibrating on my kitchen counter while I rinsed a mug. "Mr. Hughes?" A man said quietly. "This is Marcus Lane. I was a photographer at your son's wedding." "Yes." I replied. "I need you to come by my studio," he said. "Alone. And please don't tell your son yet." That word, alone, carried weight. "Is Daniel all right?" I asked. A pause. A breath. "Your son is fine. But sir, there's something you need to see." I drove without turning on the radio. Red lights felt longer than usual. Traffic pressed in like it knew something I didn't. Marcus's studio was dim. Cameras sat untouched. His eyes looked like sleep had been optional and losing. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't explain. He turned his laptop toward me. "Just look." The first image loaded slowly. Claire, in her wedding dress, not on the dance floor, not beside my son. She stood near a service exit, arms wrapped around a man in a dark suit. His hand rested at her lower back. Not friendly. Familiar. "That's not Daniel," I said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "His name is Adrian Cole." She told people he was a cousin. More images followed. Timestamps. Claire slipping away during speeches. Adrian following minutes later. Her return. Lipstick retouched. hair slightly undone. Men my age don't shout when something breaks inside them. We go quiet. "There's more," Marcus said, voice cracking. He pulled up documents, company filings, shell accounts, transfers, names of investors, older names, familiar names. Some people I remembered meeting at the wedding. My mother trusted them, he whispered. She lost everything. She died believing she failed. I leaned back slowly. And from what we uncovered, he added, "You were next." The room didn't spin. It sharpened. Claire didn't marry my son for love. She married into access. Daniel wasn't the prize. He was the door. I folded my hands together, steady. "Does my son know?" I asked. "No." "Good." Marcus looked surprised. "A man deserves one last night of peace," I said. "Show me everything." And he did. By the time I left the studio, the desert air felt colder than it should have been. That night, I sat on my porch in the dark, Eleanor's roses barely visible, and understood something most men learn too late. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on a single light. The house felt different, not unfamiliar, just heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed what I now knew. I hung my keys on the same hook by the door. The small metal click sounded louder than it ever had, as if marking the end of something I hadn't realized was already finished. I sat at the kitchen table, hands flat on the worn oak surface, breathing slowly. Too slowly. The way you do when your heart hasn't caught up to your mind yet. No tears came. No anger either. Just a quiet pressure behind my ribs, like something settling into place. The refrigerator hummed. The old wall clock ticked. Time, indifferent as always, kept moving. My son's happiness, the light I'd held on to for months, suddenly felt fragile, like a candle too close to an open window. I pushed my chair back and stepped onto the porch, lowering myself into the rocking chair Eleanor and I bought decades ago. Though it grown under age, mine and its own. The night sky stretched wide above the mesquite trees, stars scattered without urgency. Eleanor used to sit beside me there, blanket over her knees when the breeze picked up, humming without realizing it. I touched the ring on my keychain, rubbing the metal until it warmed beneath my thumb. "I wish you were here," I murmured into the dark. I don't know how to hold him through this alone. Grief doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it just sits, patient and heavy, waiting for you to acknowledge it. I remembered Daniel as a boy, hair sticking up after sleep, shoes always untied no matter how many times I showed him double knots. Running down the driveway yelling, "Dad, watch this!" right before doing something unnecessary and dangerous. Eleanor would laugh and say he didn't inherit the caution gene. He loved boldly then. He loved boldly now. And that bold heart was about to be broken by truth. Some nights you don't cry because you're strong. Other nights you don't cry because if you start, you might not stop. I went back inside, poured tea I didn't drink, and watched the steam rise as if it were trying to escape. My phone buzzed softly. A message from Daniel. "Love you, Dad. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen. Typed, deleted, typed again. Every response felt either too heavy or too hollow. So I sent the truth, trimmed to its bones. "Love you too, son." Sometimes love is protection. Sometimes it's silence. I slept poorly. When morning came, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a line crossed. Toast burned. Coffee went cold. I watered roses that didn't need it, hose shaking slightly in my hand until I steadied it. The neighbor's cat wandered over, tail high, acting like he owned the street. I scratched behind his ears because sometimes your hands need to comfort something when your heart can't yet comfort itself. Inside, I picked up the framed photo from a bookshelf. Daniel in his graduation cap. Eleanor leaning into me, smiling like she knew how this story would go even then. "You didn't do anything wrong," I whispered to my son's face. "You just trusted the wrong person." The ache didn't explode. It smoothed, like sanding a rough board until the edges stopped biting. That night, sleep still didn't come easily. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing change, less shaken, more deliberate. Sometime after midnight, I sat up, feet flat on the floor. No rush. No panic. Purpose. Some storms aren't meant to drown you. They're meant to carve a new river through land you thought you knew. I woke before sunrise the next morning. No alarm. Just that quiet pull inside when life stops asking you to feel and starts asking you to act. I washed my face, stared into the mirror at a man shaped by years, loss, love, and lessons time never teaches gently. Not broken, not angry, certain. The kettle hissed. Coffee bloomed dark and rich. I moved slowly, not from age, but intention. In my shop class, I used to tell the kids, you rush, you ruin. With truth, consequences, all of them punish speed. I called Marcus. He answered immediately, like he'd been waiting. I'm ready, I said. 2 words. No heat, just ground beneath them. He exhaled, relief scraping through the line. We'll do this the right way. We met later that morning at a small cafe just outside Mesa. The kind where the coffee tastes slightly burnt, but honesty feels thick in the air. Marcus wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him. Calm posture. Clear eyes. The kind that sees through excuses like glass. Walter Hughes? She asked, extending her hand. Detective Nora Bennett. Financial crimes. Elder exploitation. That phrase landed slow and deep. She spread files across the table. Patterns, timelines, money moving in circles designed to confuse and exhaust. Victims who trusted easily and paid for it with retirement savings, dignity, sometimes their health. This isn't just a personal betrayal, she said. It's organized fraud. And from what we've uncovered, your daughter-in-law intended to bring you in next. I nodded once. What do you need from me? I asked. She studied me for a long moment. Most people expect age to mean fragility. They confuse years with weakness. You pretend you trust her, she said. Let her talk. Let her think she's winning. And when she overreaches... I listened. I finished. She nodded. Exactly. Marcus slid an envelope toward me. Documents. Screenshots. Recorded calls. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like truth before it hardens into consequence. We laid out steps. Quiet ones. Clean ones. No shouting. No confrontation. Just patience sharpened into precision. Driving home, desert wind whispering across the highway. I spoke aloud to no one. She thinks she married a shield. But I've been a shelter my whole life. And shelter doesn't bow to wolves. At home, I sat at the old oak desk where Eleanor signed birthday cards and Daniel learned to balance a checkbook. I opened a notebook, not to rant, but to record. Dates, comments, moments when Claire's questions about my pension were too specific, her praise too carefully placed, patterns I once mistook for warmth. Purpose steadies a man better than pride ever could. That evening, I called Daniel. We talked about football, weather, a diner he thought I'd like. I told him I was proud of him. I didn't mention her. Truth only hold when timing is right. After the call, I looked at Eleanor's photo. You raise a stubborn one. I murmured, but I'll do this right. That night, I ironed a shirt, not because anyone demanded it, but because dignity is armor that never wrinkles when worn from within. I polished my shoes, paused in the doorway, before bed. For him, I whispered, always for him. And somewhere between the ticking clock and the steady dark, I understood something with absolute clarity. The truth was moving now, and she had no idea what she'd already set in motion. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was pretending without letting a single thought leak through my eyes. Claire had always been observant. That was part of how she worked. People like her didn't just listen, they measured. They watched pauses, posture, tone. They noticed when a man hesitated before answering a question, when a smile arrived a half-second late. So I became careful in a way that felt almost surgical. I answered her calls the same way I always had. Warm, polite, slightly deferential, like an old man grateful his son married someone so capable. I asked about her work, about the market, about how busy she must be managing everything alongside Daniel's schedule. She loved that part. She loved being seen as a competent one. Daniel visited less often after the wedding, busy with work and travel, but Claire made a point of staying in touch. She called to check on me, her voice layered with concern that now felt rehearsed. "You shouldn't be alone so much, Walter," she said one afternoon. "At your age, isolation can be dangerous." Dangerous. The word lingered longer than it should have. "I manage," I replied lightly. "Still got all my fingers." She laughed, the sound quick and controlled. "For now." I noted it, wrote it down later. She began asking questions that sounded innocent on the surface. Had I updated my will recently? Was my pension still structured the same way Eleanor and I had set it up? Did I find managing multiple accounts tiring? Each question came wrapped in concern, not curiosity. The way a spider checks the strength of a thread before trusting it. "I just worry about you," she said once. Daniel would never forgive himself if something happened and we hadn't helped. That word was new. She started offering solutions. Her firm could simplify things for me, reduce paperwork, maximize efficiency. She even sent brochures, clean, modern designs promising security and growth. Marcus confirmed later. They were identical to ones found in evidence from other victims. I told her I'd think about it. She didn't push. Not yet. Predators rush when they're desperate. Professionals wait. Daniel, meanwhile, was happy, busy, unaware. I watched him carefully when we spoke. Listened for cracks. There were none. His voice was steady, hopeful. He talked about work, about a potential promotion, about maybe buying a larger place next year. With her, I carried the truth like a glass object. Clear, fragile, capable of cutting everyone involved if dropped. The detective checked in weekly. Short calls. Precise questions. Marcus continued gathering evidence, quietly tracking movements through shell companies that folded into each other like origami designed to confuse. They were patient. So was I. The invitation came 3 weeks later. Claire wanted to meet. "Just the two of us," she said. "I'd love to walk you through some options in person. It's easier face to face." Her office sat in a polished building outside Scottsdale. Glass, steel, minimalist decor designed to imply success without substance. Fake plants, real confidence. I dressed carefully. Pressed shirt, neutral tie, shoes polished but not flashy. The costume of a man who trusts easily. She greeted me with a smile too wide, too immediate. "Walter," she said warmly, rising to hug me. "I'm so glad you came." Her office smelled faintly of citrus and ambition. She guided me to a small conference table where folders were already aligned with unsettling precision, pens placed evenly. Control disguised as courtesy. "This is exciting," she said. "A big step." I nodded. "That's what you said last time." She laughed, a little sharp around the edges. "Because it is. You've worked your whole life. You deserve rest." Rest. Another word I wrote down later. She slid documents toward me. Authorization forms. Access requests. Language dense enough to discourage reading. "We'll reposition your retirement assets," she explained. "Temporary transfer. Overseas diversification. Then we cycle returns back within 90 days. And those returns come from where?" I asked mildly. She didn't hesitate. "New investment inflow initially," she said. "It's a growth cycle. Everything balances." There it was. Casual, confident, damning. I turned the pen slowly between my fingers. "And Daniel," I asked, "is his money handled the same way?" She smiled. "Of course. It's efficient. You should trust the process." Trust. I set the pen down gently. "I think we're done here," I said. Her expression flickered. Confusion first, then irritation. "You agreed to this," she said sharply. "I agreed to listen. You promised to move forward." I changed my mind. Her posture stiffened. "You don't understand what you're risking." I met her eyes calmly. "I understand exactly what I'm risking." Before she could respond, the door opened. Detective Bennett stepped in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Marcus stood behind them. Recording device visible. Claire Morgan, The detective said evenly, "You're under arrest for financial fraud, elder exploitation, and securities violations." Time slowed. Claire's face drained of color, then flushed with fury. "You set me up," she hissed, lunging toward the table. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." She reached for her phone. An officer stopped her mid-movement. Handcuffs clicked, sharp final. As they led her away, she turned back once, eyes burning. "You think this ends with me?" she spat. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need breath to stand tall. Outside, the sun felt warm on my face. Not triumphant, just real. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your son will be proud." "I didn't do this to be a hero," I said softly. "I did it so he wouldn't spend his life wondering why the world turned cruel." Driving home, I realized something had shifted. Not relief. Freedom. That evening, I sat on my porch again, rocking gently, watching the sky do what it always does. Move on. The storm wasn't over, but the first wall had fallen. And the hardest truth, the one my son still didn't know, was waiting patiently in the quiet. The arrest didn't end anything. It started the clock. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was already buzzing. Missed calls from unknown numbers. One voicemail. Then another. Claire hadn't even reached the holding cell before the story began leaking through the cracks of the life she'd built on mirrors. I didn't listen to the messages. Not yet. I went inside, washed my hands, and did something that surprised even me. I cooked dinner. Slowly. Methodically. The same way Eleanor and I used to when life felt steady. Chopping vegetables. Letting oil heat properly before adding anything. Small rituals that remind a man he's still in control of his body, even when his world is shifting. Only after I sat down did I check my phone. The first voicemail was Claire's lawyer. Sharp, threatening, predictable. The second was Claire herself. Her voice was no longer polished, no longer confident. It was tight, frantic, layered with disbelief. "Walter, this has gone too far. You don't understand what you've done. Daniel is going to hate you for this. You destroyed everything. Call me. Now." I deleted it. The third voicemail stopped my fork midair. It was Daniel. "Dad, what's going on? Claire hasn't come home. She's not answering. Her office called. The police were there. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." There it was. The moment I'd been preparing for. I didn't call him back immediately. Not because I didn't care, but because timing matters. Truth delivered too early feels like betrayal. Truth delivered too late feels like manipulation. I needed to let him ask the right question. The next morning, the headlines broke. Not nationally. Not yet. Just enough to shake the ground beneath Daniel's feet. Local financial advisor arrested in elder fraud investigation. No names mentioned at first. Just initials. But Daniel is an engineer. He understands patterns. Connections. He called again. This time, I answered. "Dad," he said, breath unsteady. "Please tell me you know what's happening." "I do," I said calmly. A pause. "Did you know about this?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. He was recalibrating his entire internal map. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said gently. "And because she would have run." Silence. Then anger. Sharp. Protective. Human. "She's my wife," he snapped. "You went behind my back. You involved the police." "I involved the truth," I replied. "There's a difference." He exhaled hard. "Dad, you don't understand." "I understand exactly," I said. "I just understand more than you do right now." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't offend myself. I didn't need to. "You need to come here," he said. "Now." "I will," I said, "when you're ready to listen." He hung up. The waiting began. Days passed. Then a week. Daniel didn't come. But the world did. Subpoenas. Account freezes. Victims stepping forward. Elderly men and women whose retirement funds had vanished into beautifully documented nothingness. Marcus updated me daily. The case was expanding faster than expected. Shell companies folded into offshore accounts. Fake growth cycles. Manufacturer returns used to bait new money. And always the same pattern. Charm, urgency, trust, then extraction. Claire hadn't just targeted me. I'd simply been the last stop on a long road. The guilt came quietly at night. Not guilt for what I'd done, but for what I hadn't seen sooner. I replayed dinners, conversations, compliments that had felt slightly off, but harmless at the time. The way she'd asked about my health, my memory, my paperwork. Predators don't bite first. They test. 2 weeks after her arrest, Daniel showed up. No call, no warning. I saw his car pull into the driveway through the front window. He sat there for nearly a minute before getting out. Just sitting, hands on the wheel, breathing. He looked smaller when he stepped inside. Not physically. Something deeper. Like certainty had drained out of him. We didn't hug. We sat at the table where Eleanor used to grade crossword puzzles and argue with me about clues. She lied to me. He said, finally, yes, about everything. About the things that mattered. He nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. She moved money, Dad, my money. I didn't even realize how much until the accounts were frozen. I know. She used my name, my signature. I feel like an idiot. You're not, I said firmly. You were trusting. He laughed bitterly. Same thing, apparently. No, I corrected. Very different. Trust is human. Exploitation is calculated. He rubbed his face. How long did you know? Long enough to make sure she couldn't hurt you again. His eyes snapped up. Again? I didn't answer immediately. Daniel, I said carefully, I need you to understand something before I say the next part. He leaned back, arms crossed, defensive but listening. She married you because she loved what you made possible. I said, not because she loved you. The words landed heavy. She planned to move my assets. I continued, then yours. Eventually. That wasn't speculation. That was documented. He stared at the table. How close was she? He asked quietly. Closer than you think. Silence filled the room. Thick. Final. Then something shifted. Not anger. Resolve. I want to see everything, he said. All of it. Marcus came over that evening. Files. Timelines. Transfers. Audio transcripts. Daniel didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. He watched the illusion collapse piece by piece. At midnight, he stood up. I need air. I followed him onto the porch. He leaned on the railing, staring into the dark. She would have ruined us, he said. Both of us. Yes. And you stopped it. I slowed it, I said. The truth did the rest. He turned to me then, really looked at me. I'm sorry, he said, for not listening, for choosing comfort over questions. I nodded once. Apology accepted. He swallowed. What happens now? That was the question I've been waiting for. Now, I said, she fights. And when she does, things will get uglier before they get quiet. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. This is Claire. A voice said coldly. From county lockup. You think you've won. You haven't. Daniel's eyes narrowed. I don't need to win. I replied evenly. I just needed to stop losing. She laughed. A brittle sound. You destroyed your son's marriage. No, I said. You did. You think the story ends with fraud? She hissed. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I glanced at Daniel. Let him hear it. Good, I said quietly. Because everything you say from now on is being recorded. The line went dead. Daniel exhaled slowly. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It's just reached the part where people start showing who they really are. And somewhere, deep in the silence that followed, I knew one thing for certain. The most dangerous move she hadn't made yet was still coming. Claire didn't stay silent after that call. Silence isn't a weapon people like her know how to use. The next morning, Daniel forwarded me an email from her attorney. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't apologetic. It was aggressive. Accusations wrapped in legal language. Hints of counterclaims. Suggestions of misunderstandings and misinterpretations. There was even a paragraph questioning my mental capacity, carefully worded but unmistakable. That part made me smile, not because it amused me, but because it confirmed exactly who she was. "She's trying to flip it," Daniel said over the phone. "Make it look like you manipulated everything." "Of course she is," I replied. When predators lose control, they try to turn themselves into victims. The following days unfolded like a slow-burning fire. More victims came forward. People who'd been embarrassed, ashamed. People who hadn't wanted to admit they'd been fooled by confidence and kindness weaponized against them. A retired nurse who lost her husband's life insurance payout. A former electrician whose pension vanished 6 months before a stroke. A widow who still kept the fake quarterly statements in a drawer, reading them when she couldn't sleep. Each story added weight and pressure. Claire's world was closing in, but desperation sharpens people. It was Daniel who noticed it first. "She's been asking about you," he said one evening, through intermediaries, mutual acquaintances, old contacts from the wedding. "She wants proximity," I said. "Control feels closer when you can see it." She also asked about Mom. That made me pause. About Eleanor? Yes, about her accounts, her will, her estate planning. My jaw tightened. "She's digging," I said, "which means she's not done." That night, I pulled Eleanor's old documents out of the study drawer. Letters, notes, insurance policies, things we'd filed away years ago and never touched again. And then I saw it. A detail I'd overlooked, an amendment, dated 8 months before Eleanor died. Perfectly legal, perfectly executed. Claire hadn't written it, but she'd known about it. The amendment gave Daniel immediate control of a small discretionary trust Eleanor had created quietly, something she'd done after watching her own sister lose everything to a charming liar decades earlier. Eleanor always trusted instincts over appearances. Claire had probably found out about it during wedding planning conversations. Casual questions, harmless curiosity, and she'd waited. That trust wasn't massive, but it was liquid, which meant it could disappear fast. She was positioning herself, Daniel said when I told him, waiting for timing. "Yes," I replied. And now she's desperate enough to move without timing. The next attack came publicly. An anonymous tip appeared online. Claims that I'd orchestrated the fraud, coerced Claire into illegal actions, manipulated my son emotionally to cover my own financial missteps. It was sloppily written, too emotional, too fast. Claire's fingerprints were all over it. Marcus shut it down within hours, but the damage wasn't about credibility. It was about distraction. "She's trying to muddy the waters," Daniel said. "No," I corrected. "She's trying to buy time." And time was the only thing she had left. 2 nights later, Daniel called me after midnight. "She tried to contact me directly," he said, voice low. "From jail. Use another inmate's phone privileges." "What did she say?" He hesitated. "She cried. Then she threatened. Then she offered a deal." My hands curled into fists, not with anger, but readiness. "What kind of deal?" She said she'd give names. Bigger ones. Investors. People higher up the chain. "If I convince you to ease off." I laughed quietly. "That's not a deal," I said. "That's leverage disguised as remorse." She also said something else, Daniel added. Something that bothered me. "What?" She said this was just the first layer. That people don't forgive men like you for exposing them. That night, sleep didn't come. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was working through possibilities. People like Claire don't act alone. They collaborate, network, protect each other. And when exposed, they don't always retaliate directly. Sometimes they let others do it. The next morning, my mailbox was empty, but the one after that wasn't. Inside was an envelope with no return address. Inside that envelope was a photocopy of my home deed. Highlighted. No note. No message. Just a reminder. I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. I contacted Marcus instead. "Escalation phase," he said after I described it. "They're probing. Testing reactions." "What do you recommend?" Visibility, he said, and documentation. So we did exactly that. I moved nothing quietly. Every step I took became public, legal, recorded. I updated my will, filed notices, made everything transparent. Predators hate light. And then, finally, Claire cracked. During a preliminary hearing, she overplayed her hand, accused the prosecution of targeting her unfairly, claimed personal vendettas, named people who hadn't yet been investigated, people who didn't appreciate being dragged into daylight. Within 48 hours, her legal support began evaporating. Lawyers withdrew. Statements changed. The narrative fractured. Daniel visited her one last time. Not out of love, out of closure. He told me about it afterward. She didn't ask about me, he said quietly. She asked about the case, about what you were doing. That tells you everything, I said. She looked smaller, he added. Not weak, just empty. Some people are only large when feeding. I replied. Weeks passed. Charges multiplied. Assets were seized. The story reached national outlets. Claire's name became a warning, not a brand. And still, something felt unfinished. I sensed it in the quiet moments. The storm had passed, but the pressure change was still coming. Because when someone like her loses everything, they don't always disappear. Sometimes, they make one last move. And I knew it, because the call I'd been expecting finally came. The call didn't come from a number I recognized. It came from a blocked line, late enough that the world had already gone quiet. The kind of hour where nothing good arrives unannounced. I let it ring twice before answering. Arthur, a voice said. Female. Calm. Too calm. You don't know me, but we need to talk. I didn't ask who she was. People who speak like that want control of the moment. I wasn't giving it to her. If this is about Claire, I said, you're late. A pause. A recalibration. It's about what comes after Claire, she replied. That was when I knew the circle was wider than I'd hoped, and smaller than I'd feared. You should stop, she continued. You've made your point. I didn't make a point, I said evenly. I told the truth. She sighed, almost amused. Truth is negotiable when enough people have an interest in changing it. I'm not interested in negotiations, I said. That's unfortunate, she replied, because others are. I waited. Your name is being discussed, she continued. Your finances, your decisions, your mental capacity. There was again. They were circling back to the same angle. You've already tried that, I said. It didn't work. She laughed softly. It doesn't have to work everywhere. Just once. The line went dead. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, phone still pressing my ear, listening to nothing. Then I did something Eleanor once taught me to do when something didn't sit right. I wrote it down. Time, tone, exact wording, every detail. Because memory fades. Records don't. The next morning, Marcus arrived earlier than usual. He didn't knock, just walked in like someone who already knew the house had become a strategic space. Someone reached out. I said. He nodded. We expected that. Indirect pressure. I continued. Professional, polite, threat adjacent. Which means Claire was a contractor, Marcus replied. Not the architect. That word settled heavily. Architect. I'd spent my life building things. I understood structures. Load-bearing points. What happens when you remove the wrong support? Who else is exposed? I asked. More than you'd like, he said. Less than they think. We reviewed the evidence again. Not just Claire's, but the financial pathways branching outward. Shell entities. Consultancies. Advisory firms that existed only on paper. This wasn't passion-driven fraud. It was industrial. Daniel needs to be protected, I said. Marcus nodded. Already done. But protection isn't only physical. It's psychological. And that was where the real danger lay. Daniel was changing. Not breaking, but hardening. I don't recognize myself sometimes, he admitted one evening. I don't trust my instincts anymore. That's normal, I said. When trust is used against you, your mind overcorrects. I keep thinking, what if I miss other signs, he asked. You didn't, I said firmly. You were chosen because you're decent. That didn't comfort him. Decency feels like a liability when the world shows you how easily it can be exploited. That's when the counterattack came, not legally, but socially. A former colleague of mine received a call. A neighbor, a distant cousin. Questions disguised as concern. Has Arthur been okay lately? Has he seemed confused? Has he been handling stress well? It was subtle, slow, character erosion. She's poisoning the well, Daniel said. No, I corrected. Someone else's... And then the document surfaced. A motion filed by Claire's legal team, approved by someone higher up, requesting a full psychological evaluation of me as a key witness, citing erratic decision-making and potential coercion. They weren't trying to discredit my evidence. They were trying to disqualify me. They're not going after what you know, Marcus said grimly. They're going after whether you're allowed to know it. That night, I sat alone in the study. Eleanor's photograph sat on the desk, unchanged. I need your help, I said aloud. Not to fight, to finish this clean. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I called the press. Not sensational outlets. Not tabloids. One journalist. Investigative. Slow. Relentless. I didn't give her everything. I gave her enough. Names. Patterns. Documents already public but never connected. And then I waited. When the article hit, it didn't accuse. It questioned. And questions are far more dangerous. Within hours, the motion against me was withdrawn. Too much attention. Too many eyes. That's when the real threat arrived. Not words. Not lawyers. Action. My home security system alerted just after midnight. Rear gate. Manual override attempt. I didn't panic. I didn't rush. I watched. A shadow moved near the perimeter fence. Careful. Intentional. Then another. 2 figures. Not burglars. Too precise. I called Marcus. He was already en route. The figures disappeared before authorities arrived. No damage. No forced entry. Just a message. You're not untouchable. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. But fear never came. Only clarity. They weren't trying to scare me into silence anymore. They were trying to force a mistake. And I wasn't going to give them one. Because when people escalate like this, it means something else has happened. Something they don't want found. The next morning, Marcus walked in holding a folder. They moved, he said. Who? I asked. The architect. I leaned back slowly. Then it's time, I said. For what? Daniel asked. To stop waiting, I replied, and start ending this. Outside, the world looked the same. But beneath it, foundations were shifting. And somewhere, someone realized too late. They should have never pushed an old man who knows how to build things and how to take them apart. Once you recognize the architect, you stop worrying about the bricks. Everything I had faced until then, Claire, the shell companies, the legal pressure, the whispered questions about my sanity, those were symptoms, tools, replaceable pieces in a larger mechanism designed to move money and people without ever leaving fingerprints. The architect didn't appear in headlines, didn't sign documents, didn't threaten directly. They simply made problems disappear or people irrelevant. Marcus spread the folder across my dining table like a chessboard. Photographs, corporate charts, redacted correspondence, familiar names woven together by quiet financial ties. This isn't just elder exploitation, he said. It's asset harvesting. High net worth seniors with clean reputations, soft leverage, emotional access through family, spouses, caretakers. I stared at one photograph longer than the others. A man stepping out of a black sedan, gray hair, custom suit, face you forget 5 minutes after passing him on the street. He doesn't look dangerous, Daniel said. That's why he is, Marcus replied. The architect didn't threaten you. They made you feel irrelevant before you realized you were targeted. This man, Marcus continued, tapping the photo, controls 3 advisory firms, 2 philanthropic foundations, and a private arbitration network that keeps disputes out of public courts. Meaning? Daniel asked. Meaning victims disappear into paperwork. Marcus said. And settlements get buried. I folded my hands slowly. And he made a mistake, I said. Marcus looked at me. Which one? He underestimated age, I replied. And he underestimated memory. Because when you've lived long enough, you remember patterns. This wasn't new. It was refined. The next move wasn't legal. It was personal. Daniel received an email that afternoon from a former mentor, someone he trusted. The message was gentle. Concerned. It suggested distance. Suggested therapy. Suggested maybe stepping away from stressful family matters. They're isolating him, I said. Yes, Marcus agreed. They're separating variables. That night, Daniel snapped. Not loudly, not violently. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. I feel like everything I touch becomes leverage, he said quietly. Like I'm dangerous to people just by being connected to you. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. No, I said, you're dangerous because you didn't look away. Silence stretched. They're going to come harder, he said. Yes, I replied. And that's why we stopped waiting. The architect believed in control through distance. So I removed distance. I requested a meeting, not directly, through one of his foundations. A donation inquiry. Large. Time-sensitive. Old money gets meetings. The response came within 12 hours. A private office. Neutral city. No press. No records. Marcus didn't like it. You're stepping into his territory, he warned. No, I said. I'm inviting him into mine. Daniel insisted on coming. They'll see me as weakness, he said. No, I replied. They'll see you as liability. That's better. The building was unremarkable. Clean. Glass. No signage. The kind of place where things are decided quietly. The architect arrived exactly on time. He smiled warmly, extended a hand. Arthur, he said, it's a pleasure. I shook his hand. It's overdue, I replied. We sat. No small talk. He leaned back comfortably, hands folded. I understand you've been through something unfortunate, he began. I understand, I replied. You specialize in unfortunate things happening quietly. A flicker crossed his eyes. Not fear. Interest. I admire clarity, he said. It's rare. So is restraint, I replied. He smiled again. You've caused complications, he said calmly. Disruptions. Attention. I've caused exposure. I corrected. Complications are what follow. He studied me. You're very confident, he said. For someone standing alone. I nodded slightly. That's illusion, I replied. He glanced at Daniel. And your son, he said gently. Young men struggle with pressure. Daniel met his gaze. So do old men, Daniel replied. But they don't show it. The architect chuckled. Family loyalty is admirable, he said, but expensive. Only when for sale, I replied. Silence settled. Then he spoke again, voice smooth. What would it take, he asked, for you to step back? I leaned forward. Truth, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Truth is subjective. No, I replied. Accountability is not. The temperature in the room shifted. He exhaled slowly. You don't understand the scale of what you're touching, he said. This ends with you tired. Quiet. Forgotten. I smiled. That's already happened, I said. The difference is, I notice. He stood. I offered you an exit, he said. You offered me silence, I replied. I chose legacy. His smile vanished. When we left, Marcus was waiting. That went better than expected, he said. Yes, I replied, because now he knows something. What's that? Daniel asked. That I'm not afraid of being erased, I said, which means he can't threaten me. The retaliation came faster than before. Banking delays, audits, a subpoena attempt that dissolved within hours. They were testing responses, mapping resistance. Then the article dropped. The second one. This time, names were printed, not accusations. Connections. Public records stitched together. The architect didn't deny it. He disappeared. That's when things get dangerous. Because when powerful people stop defending themselves, they're preparing to remove obstacles. The security incident 2 nights later wasn't subtle. This time, alarms blared. Lights flooded the property. 4 figures breached the perimeter. They didn't run when spotted. They retreated calmly. Professionals. Message delivered. Daniel's hands shook afterward. Not fear. Anger. They think they can scare us into backing down, he said. They think you'll choose safety over truth. I replied. And you? He asked. I looked at him. I already chose, I said. The next morning, Marcus arrived with news. They're collapsing internally, he said. Assets frozen. Partners distancing themselves. Then it's almost over, Daniel said. Marcus shook his head. No, he said. It's the most dangerous phase. Because predators don't fight when they're strong. They fight when they're cornered. And somewhere, the architect was making one last calculation. Whether removing me was worth the cost. I sat in the study that night, lights off, listening to the house breathe. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Because when you build something slowly, carefully, honestly, you don't panic when someone tries to tear it down. You let them reveal themselves. And then you finish it. The storm wasn't over, but it had direction now. And for the first time since the call that started all of this. So, D.I., when people like him disappear, they don't go into hiding. They consolidate. The architect didn't vanish to protect himself. He vanished to reduce noise, to let the system keep moving without his face attached to it. Men like that understand something fundamental. Attention is temporary, but infrastructure lasts. And infrastructure, once exposed, becomes a liability. The first sign came through Marcus. They're bleeding internally, he said over phone. Not publicly, yet. But money's frozen in places that were never meant to be seen. Meaning? I asked. Meaning someone panicked, he replied. And panic leaves fingerprints. Daniel had barely slept. Neither had I. But exhaustion feels different when purpose replaces fear. Your body aches, but your mind sharpens. You start noticing details you once ignored. Sounds. Patterns. Timing. Like the black sedan that had idled 2 blocks away 3 mornings in a row. Different drivers. Same vehicle. Daniel noticed it too. They're watching, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, but not to intimidate. Then why? To confirm whether I'm predictable. I said. I wasn't. That afternoon, I did something the architect wouldn't expect. I went public. Not loudly. Not recklessly. I filed a civil complaint, narrow, precise, impossible to dismiss without exposure. It wasn't about money. It was about process. Every document referenced public records. Every claim linked to verifiable transfers. Every footnote led to a question no one wanted asked. The case didn't name him. It didn't have to. The effect was immediate. Emails leaked. Partners resigned. 2 shell firms shut down overnight. Daniel stared at the news on his phone, stunned. You just triggered an avalanche, he said. No, I replied. I redirected it. That evening, Marcus arrived in person. His face was grim. They're mobilizing, he said. Private security contracts. Legal pressure. One of my contacts went dark. Daniel stood up. This is getting dangerous, he said. For you? I met his gaze. For us? I corrected. Silence stretched. Then Daniel spoke again, voice low. If they try to take you out of the equation, he paused. What's the plan? I had anticipated the question. Then they fail, I said. Because this stopped being about me weeks ago. I slid a folder across the table. Daniel opened it. Inside were documents I prepared quietly over months, contingency trusts, conditional disclosures, timed releases. If anything happens to me, I said, everything goes public, not selectively. Completely. Daniel swallowed. You planned your own disappearance, he said. No, I replied. I planned their exposure. Marcus nodded slowly. That changes the math, he said. Yes, I agreed, and they know it now. The architect resurfaced 2 days later. Not directly. Through a proxy. A woman with a polished smile and impeccable timing. She requested a meeting. Neutral ground, she said. No lawyers. No recordings. I smiled at the request. They always ask for what they can't control, I said. I agreed to the meeting. Marcus hated it. You're walking into a pressure chamber, he warned. Yes, I replied. But pressure reveals structure. Daniel insisted on coming again. They won't respect you alone, he said. They'll test boundaries. They already have, I replied. Now they'll test resolve. The cafe was upscale, discreet, and designed for conversations people didn't want overheard. She arrived precisely on time. Introduced herself only by first name. You've caused significant disruption, she said calmly after we sat. Disruption is a cost of correction, I replied. She studied me carefully. You understand how this ends, she said. I understand how it begins, I answered. That's usually enough. She leaned forward. There are ways to make this go away, she said. Quietly. I'm not interested in quiet, I replied. I'm interested in permanent. Her smile tightened. You're risking your son, she said, glancing at Daniel. Daniel leaned forward before I could respond. No, he said evenly. He's protecting me. That unsettled her. Good. She took a breath. What do you want? She asked. I didn't hesitate. Full disclosure, I said. Every entity, every intermediary, every compromise account. Voluntary. She laughed softly. That's not a negotiation, she said. It is, I replied. You just don't like the terms. She stood. You're forcing escalation, she said. Yes, I replied, because containment failed. She left without another word. That night, the attempt came. Not physical, digital. Daniel's accounts were flagged. His employer received anonymous tips. A whisper campaign ignited overnight. By morning, he was suspended pending investigation. He sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched. They're trying to isolate me, he said. Yes, I replied, because they can't touch me directly. Marcus arrived again, furious. They cross a line, he said. They're making it personal. I nodded, which means they're losing. I replied. I made another call. This one I'd been saving. A journalist. Not hungry. Careful. One who understood systems, not scandals. I gave her access, not to stories, but to frameworks. Patterns. She didn't publish immediately. She verified. That's when the architect made his last mistake. He tried to accelerate. A rushed transaction. A forced liquidation. Too fast. Too visible. The article dropped 3 days later. Not an expose. A map. It didn't accuse. It connected. And once connected, nothing could be unseen. The architect's name appeared, not as a villain, but as a constant. The effect was catastrophic. Banking partners froze assets. Regulators opened inquiries. Former allies vanished. Daniel's suspension was lifted within hours. Apologies poured in. He ignored them. They never cared, he said quietly. No, I agreed. They cared about risk. That night, the black sedan returned. But it didn't idle. It passed. Slowly. Once. A farewell. Marcus called an hour later. He's done, he said. Not arrested. Not yet, but finished. Daniel exhaled for the first time in weeks. So that's it? He asked. I shook my head. No, I said. Now comes the silence. The kind that follows collapse. The kind where survivors assess damage and decide who to blame. I knew the architect wouldn't retaliate now. He couldn't afford it. But others might. People whose names hadn't surfaced yet. People who preferred shadows. I walked through the house that night, touching familiar things. The banister, the bookshelf, the chair by the window. I wasn't afraid. I was clear, because this was never about punishment. It was about interruption. Breaking a system that fed on trust. Teaching a new variable it couldn't model. An old man who didn't need to win. only to finish. The storm had passed, but the ground was still shifting. And somewhere far away, someone was realizing, too late, that underestimating patience was more dangerous than underestimating power. Part 9 would not be about conflict. It would be about consequences. And those last longer. The aftermath didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrived with silence. The kind that settles after a structure collapses, and the dust has nowhere left to fall. Phones stopped ringing. Emails slowed to a trickle. The black sedan never returned. The city moved on, unaware that something vast had just been dismantled without noise. Daniel slept for 12 hours straight. I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table before dawn, the same place where so many conversations had once felt ordinary and now carried weight. My hands rested around a mug that had gone cold, not because I forgot to drink it, but because I didn't need to. My body finally understood what my mind already had. The danger wasn't over, but it was finished. Those are not the same thing. Marcus confirmed it 2 days later. He arrived without urgency, without tension. His shoulders weren't tight anymore. They're retreating, he said, quietly, selling assets, settling matters before questions get louder. And him, I asked. He paused. He's isolated, Marcus said, not indicted. Not yet, but no protection left. No leverage. That was enough. Because men like the architect don't fear prison first. They fear irrelevance. Daniel joined us midway through the conversation. He looked different now. Not lighter, stronger. Like someone who had walked through something that stripped illusions away and left only bone-deep clarity. They offered me a promotion, he said flatly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Crisis optics, he muttered. Daniel nodded. I declined. I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the steadiness in his posture, the absence of anger in his voice. Why? I asked. Because they didn't protect me when it mattered, Daniel said. They protected themselves. I don't want to build a future on that. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not pride. Relief. That night, I finally slept. Dreamless. Deep. The kind of rest that comes when your mind no longer scans for threats. The reckoning arrived weeks later, not to us, but around us. One firm quietly dissolved. Another merged and vanished. A third changed leadership overnight. The journalist published a follow-up, not an update, but a postscript. It didn't add drama. It added context. And context is devastating to lies. No one came knocking on our door. They didn't need to. Everything that needed to surface already had. Daniel moved through his days with purpose now. Not urgency. Purpose. He cooked dinner sometimes. Asked questions. Talked about things beyond survival. One evening, while we washed dishes together, he said, I used to think strength meant fighting harder. I smiled faintly. And now, I asked, now I think it means choosing where not to fight, he said. I turned the tap off. That realization, I said, will save you decades. There was one last message. It came late, from an unfamiliar number. No threats, no demands, just 4 words. You ruined everything. I deleted it, because that wasn't true. What I ruined was access, exploitation, certainty. Everything else collapsed under its own weight. Months passed. The seasons changed. Daniel found work elsewhere, not through connections, but through merit. The offer wasn't flashy. It was solid, ethical, built on transparency. He took it without hesitation. We spoke less about what happened, not because it was unresolved, but because it no longer needed to define us. One afternoon, as we walked through a quiet park, Daniel stopped. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. When you first suspected. I thought about it. About fear. About timing. About love that protects by waiting. Because truth delivered too early can still destroy, I said. I wanted you to face it standing, not falling. He nodded slowly. I was angry at first, he admitted. Not at you, at myself, for trusting so easily. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Trust isn't flaw, I said. It's a risk, and risks don't become mistakes unless you refuse to learn from them. He exhaled. Then I'm glad, he said quietly, that you didn't let me learn alone. The architect's name surfaced once more, buried in a legal notice few would read. Asset seizure, civil penalties, no drama, no redemption, just consequence. Daniel saw it on his phone and handed it to me. I glanced at it once and handed it back. That chapter's closed, I said. He nodded. Later that evening, as the house settled into familiar sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of cooling wood, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on. I thought about how close everything had come to unraveling, how easily silence could have been mistaken for weakness, how patience, when misunderstood, invites predators, and how dangerous it becomes when those predators realize too late that patience was never passive. It was strategic. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. Because the goal was never destruction. It was protection. Protection of my son. Protection of truth. Protection of the quiet dignity that comes from knowing you didn't become what threatened you. Daniel passed through the room, paused, and looked back at me. Thank you, he said. For what? I asked. For showing me that power doesn't have to announce itself, he replied. I smiled. Most of the time, I said, it shouldn't. The world moved on. But somewhere beneath it, a system had been forced to adapt. And a man who once believed silence made him untouchable learn the difference between being unheard and being finished. That was the end. Not with noise, but with clarity. If my story stayed with you, take a moment to let it travel further. Share where you're listening from and what part resonated most. Because stories like this remind us that strength doesn't shout, it endures. And if you value stories about truth, patience, and consequences, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one.